Story 1. I work in a Chinese and Vietnamese takeaway shop. The other day, a woman came in, and I was quite surprised by how much she expected from us. We have a hot display case with meats and rice, and after about 2 p.m. every day, we pack it up into a few takeaway containers and mark it down. By around 6:30, when this entitled customer came in, these meals are admittedly not very fresh, they're just kept warm. But that's the reason they're discounted, you know. Well, this was the conversation. Customer: last time I bought one of these, I went home, and the rice was no good. Me: I'm so sorry to hear that. I agree they aren't as fresh as they were at lunch. That's why they're marked down. Customer: well, I want to buy this marked down meal, but you need to make sure the rice is fresh. Me: I'm sorry, but I can't do that. If you'd like, you can order fresh food from the kitchen. Customer: but I want this one. You just need to make sure it's fresh. Me: like I said, I can't guarantee complete freshness because it's left over from lunchtime. You also don't have to buy it if you don't want to. Customer: fine, I'll buy it. But if I get home and it's not fresh, then I'm never coming back. Me: okay, sure thing. Kind of unbelievable, honestly. And that wasn't the only strange encounter I had with her. Here's another conversation that happened later. Customer: I'd like the laksa noodle soup, but you need to make sure there's enough soup because last time there wasn't enough. My colleague: oh, so would you like less noodles or toppings to make it more balanced out? Customer: no, don't take anything out, just add more soup. My colleague: sure, we can do that. We just made it like normal because we always fill our dishes to the brim. We couldn't add more soup even if we wanted to. She also seemed annoyed that my colleague and I weren't Chinese. She asked, in a rather judgmental tone, if we were the ones cooking. We told her we just serve and make the banh mi sandwiches. She seemed somewhat satisfied when she found out we didn't cook the food. She kept asking about many menu items in a rude and condescending way, saying, I'm just making sure that things are being made properly because I'm Asian and I know how to cook. I was thinking, congratulations. She seemed even happier after I mentioned that my boss and the chef were Chinese. But honestly, if she can cook so well, why come here and criticize everything? We're just a small Chinese takeaway place that's admittedly not the most authentic anyway. Anyway, that was the entitled customer who came into our shop the other day. Not the worst encounter compared to others I've read about, but still pretty amusing in my opinion. Story 2. My friend is seriously wealthy. He was born in England but moved to Switzerland in his 20s to work in his dad's aviation firm. I met him when working in Paris 2000 and we became pretty good friends, but only really because we were in the same place at the same time. 2 young English guys in Paris. His dad is extremely demanding as a boss and the CEO of the company. Ever seen the HBO series Succession? His family is just like that. His father plays his 3 sons off against each other. They are constantly bickering with each other and trying to get their father's validation. It's painful to watch. In 2009, he called me to tell me he was getting married to a Swiss girl. I hadn't met her, but I knew she was hard work. Back in the day of cheap flights, we used to meet up around Europe. She would constantly bombard him with messages and call the entire time to find out what he was doing. He asked me to be his best man, which I gratefully accepted. He would be getting married in some weird Gothic castle in Switzerland in January. He asked to bring my wife and daughter, and we would be seated on the top table with his parents and his brothers. I was honored but decided not to take them. My daughter had just been born 2 months before. I really didn't want to put my wife through a wedding when she just wanted to relax at home. Besides, there would be no other kids going, and it would be -4 degrees 24 F at night in some castle in the middle of nowhere. I informed him I would be going alone. He wasn't happy about it, but accepted it. I felt bad and said that I would do whatever to help with the wedding. Things got weird after that. I arrived at the wedding the night before and stayed with him in his apartment. His wife-to-be was just preparing to leave and stay in a hotel for the night and wouldn't even look at me. She completely ignored me as I arrived. There were really bad vibes in the apartment, like they didn't really want me there. She just sat on the sofa in the apartment glaring at me and eventually left for the hotel. I thought it was odd, but it was their wedding, so I just smiled and went along with it. We went out for a few drinks that night, and he was a little on edge. He screamed at a waiter for no reason for about 10 minutes, but apart from that, he was okay. The next day, with a hangover, we went to the castle for the wedding. I found out that I had been removed as the best man. He never told me, and his whole family just acted as if I had completely snubbed them by not bringing my wife and newborn baby, as if I had done it on purpose to ruin the wedding. I was told to help the band set up, lay the tables, and basically be on hand to help out, which I did. As I ran around bringing in glasses and boxes of wine, all the other guests were drinking champagne in the castle. I then found out I had also been removed from the top table and put in a corner table with his work colleagues he barely knew, and none of them spoke English. I just sat there for the whole of the 8-hour wedding in total disbelief. I actually went out and stood in the -4 degrees temperature night outside the castle just to take a break from sitting at the table pretending to enjoy myself. At one point, the bride came round with a guest book for everybody to sign. When one of the waiters put it in front of me, the bride snatched the book and moved it on to the next person without letting me sign it. At the end of the night, the band told me I had to help them pack up. I missed the wedding bus back to the local town and had to plead with some guests to drive me back, so I wouldn't have to walk in the freezing temperatures, which they did begrudgingly. I went straight to the airport, slept for a few hours, and got a flight home. Edit. It's a bit of a weird story, so I'll hopefully clear a few things up. He is actually friends with my wife. We also met in Paris, which is why I think he was a bit offended. His wife and family are bonkers, very rich, very superficial. They all hate each other. His wife thinks I'm a bad influence. We used to go out drinking a lot back in the day. His dad is really hard on him, and it's really messed with his head. I did tell him about 1 week before that my wife and child wouldn't be going, after realizing that the castle was in the middle of nowhere. I helped out, like an idiot, because I actually felt guilty and wanted to look like I was helping him out because his dad was being very critical of the organization. Story 3. I was at a very large warehouse-style ski shop getting my boots fitted. This process involves some measuring and work to stretch and shape the boots to your feet, so it takes about 30 to 40 minutes. I had already been measured and was roaming around the giant racks of gear, waiting and admiring all the shiny, expensive stuff I didn't really need. I was sending a quick photo to a friend on my phone, so I stopped and looked down for a moment. When I looked back up, an older woman, maybe around 50, was suddenly standing right in my path. She was wearing a local middle school track team t-shirt and had the confident air of someone who thought she ran the place. She asked, "I can't find the right helmet. My son needs one." Now, I'm a man with long hair, wearing a bucket hat with a leaf-shaped pin and a t-shirt with a popular ski brand logo. I understood there could be some confusion, and she wasn't rude at first. So I smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry, I don't actually work here." She looked smug. "Really? I knew it." Feeling awkward, I said, "Oh." She continued, "That you were too busy playing on that phone to help me, and now you're lying to a regular customer just to avoid your responsibility." I started, but she cut me off. "Forget it, I'm finding your manager." I tried again. "No, really, I don't work here." Even though I was getting a bit annoyed, I still just wanted the situation to be over and save both of us and the store the trouble. She crossed her arms and said, "You're wearing a ski brand shirt. They only give those to employees, not true. Where are the extra large helmets?" I got a little sarcastic and said, "No, I'm just hanging out. Good luck finding them." I awkwardly pulled my phone back out and tried to look busy again. She started pacing around, literally huffing, as if she was rehearsing her next angry outburst. "I've bought him a board, jacket, pants, everything here. Probably more than you make in a month. and you treat me like this and lie to me. It's up to your manager if you keep this job, but I'm telling him I'm not coming back if you do." Then she stormed off toward the front checkout area. I decided to retreat to the boot fitting section on the other side of the store. I sat down in a comfy waiting chair, found out I had about 15 more minutes until my boots were done, and hoped it was all over. Nearby was a gruff older man doing ski repair work, so I figured I might be safe there. Nope. There he is, sitting instead of helping me. Why did you even hire someone so useless? She had actually dragged the manager from the front of the store all the way back to where I was. The manager looked uncomfortable and said, "He doesn't work here. He's a customer. Sorry about that." But she wouldn't back down. "He could have found you and fixed this whole mess. I want him removed." The manager just stood there, looking like a deer in the headlights. Then he quietly asked if I would apologize to her, since that's what she told him she wanted when she came to complain about the lazy, rude guy refusing to help her. I replied, "No thanks, I'm good." I didn't owe her anything. I was a semi-regular customer myself, and I knew my custom-fitted boots probably cost more than her son's starter board, jacket, and whatever else she bought. At that point, I was frustrated enough to let things play out however they would. The ski repair guy must have sensed it too, because he pulled the manager aside and whispered something to him. The manager came back and, in a nervous voice, asked the woman to follow him to the back office to sort things out. She glared at me, but clearly thought she was about to help file some official report against me. Then she followed him away. It turns out the ski repair guy was actually one of the store's owners. He told me later that he knew her well. She caused trouble regularly, but always bought something to stay in the staff's good graces. After this incident, he told her she was banned from ever coming to the store again. When I got my boots back, they threw in some free gear as a thank you for putting up with her behavior. Story 4. This happened about 5 years ago. My buddy and I were really into surfing back in high school. We went nearly every day. His mom would usually drop us off, and we'd wrap our phones in our shirts, bury them slightly in the sand, and place our towels on top. It was our daily routine. One day, we decided to surf in a somewhat sketchy area. It wasn't dangerous, but it definitely would have been smarter not to bring our phones. Unfortunately, we didn't think much about it at the time. We went surfing, and when we got back to shore, our phones were gone. We panicked for a few minutes, then asked some nearby people if they'd seen anything. They said no, but they were kind enough to let us use their phones to check, find my iPhone, and to call my friend's mom. By the time we checked, our phones were already about 5 miles away. We explained everything to his mom and figured she'd just take us home. But no, his mom was a legend. Once she picked us up, she had us log into Find My iPhone on her phone, and the chase began. We drove for almost 2 hours, following the tracker as it led us farther away from the beach. No matter how close we got, the phone signal kept moving. Find My iPhone isn't very precise. Either it only narrows it down to about 500 feet, so we had no idea which car we were following. At some point during the chase, her phone battery died. Without hesitation, she pulled off the freeway, ran through 2 stoplights, made an illegal U-turn. No one was around, so it wasn't dangerous, and quickly pulled into a convenience store where we bought a car charger. The pursuit continued. We followed the tracker for about 3 hours in total before the signal finally stopped. It led us to a small taco shop. We went inside to look around, but there were only a few families eating, so we didn't think any of them were involved. Then we noticed a man sitting at a nearby bus stop with a large duffel bag. He looked suspicious, so we immediately called the local police. They told us to stay put and not to approach him. But my friend's mom had other ideas. She decided to take matters into her own hands with a plan that, in hindsight, was ridiculous but hilarious at the time. She casually walked up to the guy and said, "Hey, I lost my phone. Do you know what time it is?" My friend and I could barely hold in our laughter. The man looked irritated and snapped, "No, so she calmly walked back to the car. We sat there laughing while the guy kept glancing over at us every few seconds, clearly getting nervous. A few minutes later, a police car drove by on the opposite side of the road. It suddenly turned on its lights, made a sharp U-turn, and headed straight for the man. The moment he saw that, he bolted across the street as fast as he could. The officer, still in the car, caught up immediately. The police officer handcuffed the man and walked him back toward us. He asked, "Do you have these kids' phones?" The man, acting angry and innocent, shouted, "No, why would I steal their phones?" The officer then opened the duffel bag and sure enough, our phones were inside. The man tried to claim that he'd bought them from some random person, and the officer just shook his head, saying something like, "That's some bad luck. Maybe don't buy phones from strangers at the beach." In the end, the guy was arrested, and after a 3-hour chase, we got our phones back. It's still one of the craziest and funniest things that's ever happened to me. Story 5. My nephew, a 20-year-old whom I've dearly loved forever and who has always loved me back, brought his new girlfriend, who is 18, to meet us and asked if they could stay over. I said, "Sure, we have 2 very comfortable sofas." The next morning, I came downstairs and found them both entwined on one of the sofas. This might not bother most people, but we are devout Christians and do not believe that intimacy before marriage is a good idea. It is something we try to instill in our own children, who are 14, 12, 9, and 6 years old. Still, since my nephew and his girlfriend are not Christians, we decided to ignore it. After all, as the saying goes, you can't clean a fish before you've caught it. We explained to our children that we can't enforce our beliefs on others, even though this situation made us a bit uncomfortable happening in our own home. This continued a few more times over the next couple of weeks. Then my nephew asked, "If I get a caravan, could I park it on your driveway so we can live there?" I said, I don't really see a problem with that, but I'll have to discuss it with my husband." A week later, he announced, "I've been thinking about moving in." I responded, surprised. "Oh, have you now?" he replied. "Yeah, it makes sense. I'm here all the time anyway." Soon, both of them were staying over most nights without even bothering to ask. One day, I came home from food shopping around 5 in the evening to find them practically wrapped around each other on the sofa. She was lying underneath him with her legs around him, while he kissed her neck and she kissed his. My 4 children were in the room on various screens and playing with toys. I said, "Hey, can we stop with the overly affectionate displays in front of my kids, please?" My nephew lifted his head and said, "What? We're cuddling," I replied. "Yes, horizontally." They both stared at me as if I was being unreasonable. "We're only cuddling," he said again. I turned into a bit of a comedian and replied, "I barely kiss my husband in front of our kids, so this kind of horizontal canoodling is a bit much." I waved my hands dramatically and laughed. They both got up and sat side by side, holding hands. Later, I sat down with them and explained our values, even though they already knew them. I told them that we were trying to raise our children with what we believe is right, and that we didn't want to cause future issues when our kids grow up and ask why their own boyfriends or girlfriends can't stay if we allowed my nephew and his girlfriend to. To their credit, they understood and hadn't been too overt since then. However, now we often came downstairs in the morning to find all the sofa cushions on the floor, where they had made themselves a makeshift double bed. The girlfriend doesn't work, so she is at our house constantly, while my nephew leaves for work at 6 in the morning and returns around 5 in the evening. She likes to binge-watch shows on streaming platforms, snacking on crisps and cereal bars, and most of what she watches is rated for ages 15 and up even while my kids are in the living room. They both know that we don't use bad language, and we've often asked them to tone down the heavy swearing. My nephew has a short temper, much like his father, and ever since he turned 18, his favorite word has unfortunately been a certain 4-letter one. Then my nephew told me that his dad had asked him to move his stuff out since he hadn't paid rent the whole time he'd been staying most nights at my house. His dad assumed he was at his girlfriend's father's house, as my nephew wouldn't admit he was staying with us. It's a long story involving hands-off parenting and numerous custody battles within that side of the family. My nephew drives a very fast car and refuses to wear a seatbelt because he says they're uncomfortable. He's even trying to break his family's record of driving 125 miles per hour. His car has lowered springs, and he recently realized that the wheels were being worn down by the rims, but he couldn't afford to fix it yet. So, he started borrowing our old car to get to work. 2 weeks later, my nephew said he was going to give me some money toward food while he was staying with us. After another 2 weeks, he offered me £50. Since he already owed me £30, I said. So, with the 30 you owe me, that's £80, then? His face fell, but he quickly recovered and said, yeah, sure. Bearing in mind, I'm on disability, we have 4 kids, and my husband earns just above minimum wage. We're not well off and pretty much live paycheck to paycheck. I order food in bulk and subscribe to items online to save money where possible. For example, I buy cans of soda in advance so we can bring them to the cinema and save money. After a sledding accident that shattered my pelvic and thigh bones, I became disabled, so I bought a cinema membership that allows me unlimited visits. With my disability card, I can bring a caregiver for free, which means I usually end up watching the same movie 3 or 4 times by taking a different child with me each time. Don't be too envious, it's usually children's films. I also buy alcohol cheaply ahead of time from discount stores like Aldi, saving it for when I actually need it. My nephew, however, tends to help himself, often taking things first and then saying, "You don't mind if I..." Well, yes, actually, I do mind now. It wasn't such a big issue when he was just visiting, but now that he's practically living here, it's become a problem. I told him, I buy these drinks for the kids, it means they get 12 cans a month, which works out to 3 each week. That's roughly what we'd use on a trip to the cinema, a hot day, or paired with a takeaway once a week. If I split them with you too, that'd leave us with far less, and you don't actually pay anything toward them. I've also started saying, buy your own snacks, because whenever my kids are eating sweets or crisps or whenever we're sharing something, he always pipes up with, "Ooh, what have you got?" This happens often. I've begun reminding him, you earn way more than we do, and there are 6 of us to live off this one income. Recently, I noticed empty beer bottles inside the car he'd borrowed from us, including one in the driver's door. I confronted him about it and said I wasn't impressed. It's incredibly disrespectful to borrow my car and then drink in it, let alone risk drinking and driving. He looked sheepish and apologized. A few days later, he called me and asked what we needed to keep from the car he'd borrowed, since it was being towed by the police. They had caught him speeding without insurance. I had assumed he'd switched his insurance to our car since I'd warned him before that we didn't have coverage on it, as we weren't driving it at the time. It was parked on our driveway, taxed but uninsured. Apparently, he tried to convince the officers that he thought he was covered under third-party insurance, but they didn't buy it. Our car got towed, and he said, "Sorry, it's going to cost you £190 to get it back out, and that increases by £20 per day, so you'll need to do it soon." Thankfully, I reminded him of what I had said when he first borrowed the car. If you get caught doing anything illegal in it, it's on you. His face fell. We borrowed £190 and got the car back. I also had to buy a new spark plug that had been damaged from an oil leak, which he installed to get the car running again. On top of that, we had to pay for a new insurance policy to get the police to release the car in the first place. Last week, our main car had to be towed to the garage because the brakes failed. I called my nephew and asked what time he'd be back, telling him, "We're going to need our car back. It's in the garage and I need to get groceries." He replied, "Well, that's not going to work given the state it's in." I said, "Yeah, I've seen the state of it, but I can push the rubbish to one side. I only need the driver's seat, I'm not taking anyone with me." He replied, "I just had to drive it into a ditch to avoid hitting some idiot driving like a maniac." I couldn't help thinking, pot, meet kettle. I asked what the damage was, and he said, "The front's gone, The driver's side mirror is hanging by its wires and smashed. There are no headlights on the left side, and half the number plate's missing. I found someone with a tow bar because it wouldn't move. I told him, "Well, you're insured third party, so you can claim it." He said, "No, because I avoided hitting him, I wasn't wearing a seatbelt and didn't want to go through the windscreen, so I drove into the ditch on purpose, and he drove off." "So," I said, "you've written off my car because you chose not to wear a seatbelt," he said. "Yeah, basically." He managed to drive it back to our house, and it wasn't running too terribly, so I drove it a couple of minutes to the supermarket to grab some food. This was around 9 in the evening, and I parked it facing the wall at the supermarket. When I got back, he said, "I'm still taking it to work in the morning because I've got no choice. Hopefully, there won't be many police officers about." He returned around 5 in the afternoon and said, "I had to limp the car home, it's really not doing well." When I tried to start it to go to the supermarket again for things I couldn't get the night before, it wouldn't even turn over. We tried to jump-start it, but it wouldn't start at all. The car was dead. He said, "You can get about 250 to 300 pounds for it from the scrapyard. I'll call them tomorrow." A couple of weeks earlier, he had already asked about scrapping it when it eventually died and said, "I'll need to use that money to get my car back on the road so I can still get to work." I can't even describe the look I gave him when he said that. He looked a little sheepish, and I asked, "Well, how much do you think it'll cost to get it sorted?" He said, "I've got to fix the tires, so probably about 200 pounds. So now here we were a 4-car family, and none of them were working. My husband had been gifted a car by his sister, but the electrics were terrible, and it kept overheating. My nephew called the scrapyard as planned, and when I asked him how they were paying me, he said, "They're paying it into my account." He had actually managed to fix his car's tires the week before and told me, "I won't be needing to borrow much." So when the breakers collected our car, I called him and asked if they had sent the money yet. He said, "Nah, it'll be later this afternoon." I told him, "Well, send it over when it gets there, yeah?" And he said, "Yeah, no problem." Around 4 in the afternoon, I called again and asked, "Have they sent you the money yet?" He replied, "Yeah," I said. "Well, send it over to me then because I need to place a supermarket delivery since I can't drive there now." He asked, "How much do you need?" And I said, "All of it." He hesitated and said, "Well, I've had to use some of it on the car." I asked, "How much did you use?" And he replied, "About 200 pounds. I gasped and called his name in disbelief, clearly frustrated. He said, "Well, I did say I'd need to borrow about 200, and then went on to tell me he'd spent about 500 that week trying to get his car sorted, as if he expected me to feel sorry for him. I reminded him of what he'd said earlier about already fixing the tires, which should have reduced the amount he needed to borrow. He said, "Oh, yeah, sorry." I demanded that he send the remaining 40 pounds over immediately and told him I'd borrow the rest from my sister. I didn't even mention that we were also about to spend 500 pounds fixing our other car. That was 5 nights ago. Our car is still in the garage because a pipe cracked and needed replacing. The repair will cost us 500 pounds, which I managed to set aside from my husband's monthly salary. But it's left us extremely tight this month, especially since my husband has had to take public transport to work. Thankfully, he works 24 to 48-hour shifts, which usually saves us on petrol because he only drives to and from work once or twice a week. We gave the top bunk in our children's room to my nephew, and now our 9 and 6-year-olds are top and tailing in our daughter's single room, meaning all 3 of the older boys are sharing. When my nephew declared that the younger boys could have the sofas so that he and his girlfriend could share the bed, we had to have yet another conversation about our values. It began with me saying, "Absolutely not, you must be joking." Since then, they've been spending weekends at her father's house. However, they still expect to be fed when they turn up here without warning. He generally doesn't sleep here more than 3 or 4 nights a week now. But last night, I didn't cook enough shepherd's pie because we didn't have enough potatoes or meat, just 454 grams of lamb mince. I managed to make it stretch by finding a few older potatoes in the pantry, making an extra batch of mashed potatoes, and stretching the meat sauce by adding another carrot, a stick of celery, and some extra water and gravy granules. I had to make this extra mash while eating my own dinner because they disappeared at 6 in the evening when I was cooking, so I didn't know they'd be eating with us. When they came back and declared that they were starving, I had to stretch the meal for all 7 of us. I think I did pretty well. They even had leftovers, which I gave to the dog. Last night, I asked my nephew when he gets paid, and he said, "Friday." "Why?" I replied. "Because we're broke, mate, and you owe us quite a lot." He said, "Oh yeah, the 200 pounds, and I said, "And the rest that you've borrowed over the last couple of weeks." I literally had to go through my bank account on my phone to add up the totals. He had conveniently forgotten the smaller amounts he'd borrowed, which added up to 238 pounds, and that doesn't even include the 190 pounds for the impound fee from a few weeks ago. He keeps forgetting about that too, since I told him I'd borrowed it from my sister. He seems to think he owes her, even though I've already paid her back. At this point, I'm getting seriously fed up. My sister showed up unannounced on Thursday and offered them her house to live in. She's been paying rent on it, but mostly stays with her partner, and they're buying another house together. The girlfriend immediately jumped at the offer since it'll cost them just under £1,000 a month, including council tax and bills, which is an incredible deal for a 2-bedroom house in that area. He started complaining about how expensive it would be, even though he earns between £20 and £25 per hour. I reminded him how lucky he was to get such a bargain, and now they're planning to move out in a couple of weeks. I honestly can't wait because we have no savings left, and not having a living room has caused constant problems. I feel like a complete fool. When we first reconnected, my nephew promised me that he always pays his debts back. But now, he owes me close to £500, has written off my car, and contributes absolutely nothing apart from the £50 he gave me 2 weeks ago. I honestly don't know how to bring up the topic without causing more tension, but I need him to start contributing from this week onward. All our money is going into getting our car fixed before the 17th because my dad is coming from Australia to visit. He has already booked a cottage for all of us to stay in together in Scotland, which will require a 10-hour drive to get there. We have to use our own car because it's a 7-seater, and we'll be staying for a week. We can't afford to hire another vehicle, especially since there are 6 of us. Any advice would be greatly appreciated.